Hey folks, welcome to the Utah County Republican Party podcast. I'm your host and the vice chair. I'm Charles Wood, and I'm here with Brady Brammer, who's running for re-election for Senate District 21.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thanks for coming, Brady.
Just two Orem High boys. I think we both graduated in 98.
Yep.
But we lightly knew each other in high school and then reconnected later in politics.
Yeah, I was vaguely aware that there was a Brady Brammer somewhere in the high school.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, it was funny because I remember way back when, I saw, Representative Brady Brammer, and I was like, is that the same guy from high school? And then I was thinking, I don't think I would even recognize the guy if I saw him.
Yeah.
Because we really didn't move in the same circles. And then I saw you and I was like, oh, he does look familiar.
Yeah.
So
no, it's been good to reconnect.
Yep, absolutely. So just to kind of kick this off a little bit, and I kind of give a little bit of this disclaimer at the beginning of all of the interviews. It was longer before I started releasing the videos because I was telling people I'm releasing them at the same time to be fair, but I'm not worried so much about that anymore because we're basically within a week of the convention at this point. So, I mean, timing is a huge deal, but anyway, I am interviewing your opponent. I try not to name the opponents in the other person's interview.
That's fair.
If you want to figure it out, if you want to mention them, great. If you don't, great. But I'm asking like where you're at on things and things like that. And I'm coming at it kind of as a delegate, even though I'm not in Senate District 21. The other thing is I'm generally asking the same questions. I've offered you both the same amount of time. And so I have a neutrality requirement as a party officer. And so I'm just trying to make sure that everything comes out even.
All right.
But yeah, I'm kind of excited to dive into some of these questions. The first question is, how did you get involved? Where have you been involved and what are you kind of working on now? And then the other question is, what's life at the Brammer's house look like? Right.
Yeah.
So like if I show up at your house and I knock on the door and I'm like, hey Brady, and you're like, come on in, am I tripping over kids and dogs and toys? Am I, it's like ignore the moody teenagers. We'll just move into the other room. Like, how does that all go?
Yeah, we've got a few moody teenagers. We've got 3 teenagers, so we have 5 kids with 2 sets of twins in there.
Oh, so, you are or were very busy.
Yeah, and so we have 18-year-old twins that are in their last year of high school, and then we have a 14-year-old boy. The twins are boy-girl. And then a 14-year-old boy, and then 9-year-old boy-girl twins as well.
Okay.
And so the 9-year-olds are pretty good at staying out from underfoot. They kind of entertain themselves. They're a riot. They're a party everywhere they go. The teenagers get moody, and we're usually doing emotional damage control most of the time. But they're great kids. They're really high-performing kids. And that's... my wife is if you've met Nikki, you know that she's pretty amazing. And to be able to have 2 sets of twins, there's, I think God sends those to special moms. And so, they're smart kids. They're interesting kids. They have interesting conversations and thoughts, and they're very talented in a lot of different ways. And so, you'll trip over some teenagers if you come to our house.
Yeah.
But they're interesting teenagers, and so and they're some of my best friends. I love talking with them. As far as how we got involved, and I say we because it really started after Nikki and I got married, and I was finishing. So I did. I have what I call 3 degrees of glory from BYU. So I have my undergraduate in American Studies, and then I did a master's in public administration and a law degree as a joint. And Nikki and I got married after 2 years of law school, and then I finished the last 2 years of the joint program.
Okay.
And when we left, we had our, we got married and then had our first set of twins in 2007. And so when we left BYU, we were going down to Southern California to work at a large law firm. And what we had talked about was that our house would be one where public service, one way or another, outside of church service, would be something we did. Right. And so neither of us ever imagined that elected office would be part of that. It wasn't, I was not the popular kid. I was, I just wanted to, I was just your typical kid, not
That's true. I knew
remarkable in
who
any
they were
way.
in high
Yeah, I
school.
was not one of the
You were not
popular
one of
kids that
them.
you knew, because yeah, and and so, but we took it seriously. The enter to learn, go forth to serve.
Uh-huh.
That motto of
Right.
BYU was meaningful to us. And so, we started out in LA. I would do pro bono adoptions for foster families.
Oh wow.
And it was one of the coolest like volunteer opportunities ever.
Uh-huh.
I just, you'll break down crying because you're in a courtroom, and for the first time a judge looks at a family and says, "Do you want this kid?" And it's the first time he's ever heard anyone say, "I want you."
Uh-huh.
Like, you are worth it, and
Right.
we want you in our family. And so it was very fulfilling, and I loved it. And then when we came back to Utah 5 years later, so this was in about 2012, we got involved with the planned giving committee for the primary children's hospital,
Uh-huh.
and we just kept serving, just saying yes to service opportunities along the way. And Nikki at the same time was doing everything in schools, and she was kind of on the school path of PTA,
Right.
room mom, whatever it was that way. And then I was asked to be on the planning commission for Highland,
Mm-hmm.
and I said yes, and I served there for about 3 or 4 years. And then when Mike Kennedy retired from the House of Representatives to run against Mitt Romney, I was asked to run. And I kept saying no. I'm
Uh-huh.
probably not the right person for that. No. But eventually I said yes. And so that was in 2018, and I won. It was a fairly, hotly contested race with some great candidates. And I've been serving in the House. I served for 6 years and then moved over to the Senate and followed Mike Kennedy again
Uh-huh.
into when he retired from the Senate
Right.
to become a congressman.
Right.
That's what happened. That's how I got involved in politics. And then if one of the interesting things about our family is my wife ran for school board for Aspen Peaks and
Mm-hmm.
won.
And the party endorsed
And
her too.
yeah, and
By the
so
way, I can't endorse in your race, but I fully endorse you picking your wife because she's terrific.
she is terrific. And she's, and one of the things that she understands is we need to have a great education, but we need to do it from the perspective that supports parental
Mm-hmm.
rights and parents,
Right.
and that supports our community values,
Mm-hmm.
and that also respects the taxpayers in a way that you can go and ask for taxes, but you do it respectfully and you honor the taxpayer instead of trying
Right.
to get around them.
Right.
And I think that the new school board has a really good philosophy of trying to work with the residents on taxes
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to against them. And I think it'll be a really fantastic school board. I've
Yeah.
been happy to be involved with that.
Yeah, they've been awesome. This is kind of a tangent from the Senate race, but I knew Steve Sparty from the party. He'd been involved in a bunch of the stuff there,
Yeah.
and Nikki as well. And I met Diane at the Lincoln Day dinner,
Yeah.
and she's terrific too. And so I'm very optimistic about where we
Yeah.
sit with that school board. So
They're just good people, and good people figure it out.
yeah,
And so we're really excited for
yeah,
that school board, and for the new school district. I think it's going to really serve our area in a way that is so customized to our area.
yep,
And that's exactly what everyone has kind of been wanting. That's why they all split.
yep, yep. I think that was really, and just staying on this tangent for a minute. I had a couple of people complain, well, that they should have let the Alpine School Board do it, and I said, I think they waited for them to do it, and then when they didn't, the cities just said, "Well, we're not getting what we need. Our kids aren't getting what we need," and so
Yeah.
they took it in their own hands. And if they wanted to split a different way, they should have put the proposition forward, and they
Yeah.
didn't.
Yep. Alpine voted not to split, and then the next day, the cities put forth their
Yeah,
interlocal to split.
yeah, and I couldn't be happier with it.
Yeah.
So I championed that for the party. I put forward the resolution to support it and
Yeah.
endorse that because it's so critical. And I ran for school board way back when, and it was a lot of these same issues, and it was like, well, we just don't have the kind of control that we need, and now we do. I mean,
Yeah.
the person who represents me, they represent a much smaller area, and we can get more of what we need.
Yeah,
So
we get better representation, and that was the biggest thing. Is we had school board members that were bigger than Senate districts,
uh-huh.
and that makes it hard to really, like, once you get more high schools than school board members within a
Yeah,
district, that's kind of the breaking point for school districts.
right.
And so I think we're at a really good size for all three of them now.
Yeah. So kind of spinning into because you're pretty involved with the school district. But one of the questions that I'm asking incumbents, and the version of this I'm asking for people who aren't incumbents, who aren't in the legislature, is what are your legislative priorities? What do you want to work on? What do
Yeah.
you want to change? But you're there.
Yeah.
So what are you working on? What kinds of things are you trying to change? What are you
Yeah.
looking for as far as, I champion these things. I fight for
Yeah.
these issues. I think we're going in the right direction here, but we could go further. We're
Yeah.
not going in the right direction here, and here's how I try and make it better.
Yeah. So, one area that I really put a lot of emphasis on is protection of children.
Uh huh.
And so, some of the things that I've done have been creating the strictest vape law
Uh huh.
in the United States. So we got rid of all the flavors, and the
Right.
nicotine content is the lowest in the nation. And it took a lot of bipartisan work to get there.
I'll bet.
And I like those issues that are not necessarily partisan,
Mm-hmm.
but they're a problem and they're hard to solve. And that one took a lot of work to get there. Another thing that I've been doing is I've been strengthening all of the child abuse laws year after year after year. And I've been working on getting the right funding and the right attorneys in place with the Attorney General's office.
Okay.
And that has led to this last year having the highest increase in prosecutions for internet crimes against children
Oh wow.
in the last year. And so I really like seeing those results in the protection of children. This last year we outlawed gambling through predictive markets like
Uh huh.
Kalshi, and we actually had the
I
Trump administration come out
I work for
against
one of
us.
those companies.
Yeah, well, I apologize, but
Don't apologize to me. I'm fine with it.
but it's illegal in Utah, and
Yeah.
it's still gambling. Like
Yeah.
you can call it something else, but it's gambling.
Yeah.
And
We added predictive to our other stuff, but yeah.
yeah, and so a lot of our young men were getting addicted to it,
Right.
particularly.
Yeah.
And so what the principle that I look to is nobody should be graduating high school with an addiction.
Right.
So I've done
That's
like
a good way to put it.
yeah, no, I've done a lot of anti-pornography
Uh-huh.
legislation, a lot of anti-child abuse legislation, a lot of anti-vaping legislation. The next one that we need to tackle this next year is there's a new tobacco product called Zyn.
Yeah. It's
And
it's a nicotine pouch.
yeah, it's a little nicotine pouch, and it's kind of like chewing tobacco. You put it
Uh-huh.
between your cheek and your gums, and it's so addictive that of those that have tried it, 72% are still using it.
Oh wow.
Like you think about that addiction
Uh-huh.
rate, and they try to loosely claim that it is an anti-tobacco, like a tobacco cessation device,
Oh, to help you quit smoking kind
but
of
they
thing.
can't claim that because the FDA won't approve them saying that. But
Uh-huh.
they try to argue that on the policy side.
Uh-huh.
But we'll need to do a similar thing to vaping, and look at what the right approach is to that, because it is becoming so addictive. Just the other day, we did our debate at the AF Junior High School.
Uh-huh.
I walked into the bathroom, and down in the urinal, just like you'd see cigarette butts, there was a little Zyn pouch
No way.
down there in the
Huh.
junior high school. And so it has a fast pickup, and the big tobacco is a lot like those squeezy balls. As soon
Uh-huh.
as you squeeze it, it pops out a different place.
Right.
So that's the new place that it's popping out.
Yeah.
And so that's one that I've really focused on, is that child protection side of things. There are a lot of other areas that I've kind of focused on. So like Utah Lake,
Mm-hmm.
I've put a ton of effort into improving Utah Lake, and we're
Right.
starting to see a lot of results. We created the Utah Lake Authority. It has, and the big part is we took what was state controlled but locally funded,
Mm-hmm.
but it's owned by the state.
Right.
So, and what we did was we flipped that. So we made it local control,
Uh-huh.
state funded.
Okay.
And now the experience that people are having at Utah Lake is so much better.
Uh-huh.
The trails are getting built. The locals that are on that board now are all working together to get their plans for their cities to line up on the trails.
Oh,
and
okay.
they're like, and we've been able to get, because it's its own authority instead of a commission,
Uh-huh.
it can receive federal dollars for
Okay.
environmental improvements. So we've been able to pull down, like, what was a trickle of money into Utah Lake. We've been able to pull down tons of federal dollars.
Uh-huh.
And now our federal delegation, like Mike Kennedy and Celeste Malloy and then John Curtis, have
Uh-huh.
done a great job. And this last year, they secured like $12 million for Utah Lake improvements.
Okay.
And we're starting to see like the Phragmites, which are
Uh-huh.
an invasive plant. We have it 88% controlled. 5 years
Oh
ago,
wow.
it was like 40%.
I could walk you a block that way and you'd see plenty of those.
Yeah, yeah, and but around Utah Lake and
Right.
the shores, we're really winning that battle. And Salt Lake is just coming to an awareness of how bad those are.
Yeah.
The Great Salt Lake is, and then the perception of Utah Lake is changing every single year. I can see
Mm-hmm.
improvements. And so that's one of the local things that I've been working on. And then one of the things that I work on a lot is infrastructure and transportation.
Right.
And that takes about 10 years to build out. So I've
Right.
been in for 8 years. We're just about to see the things that once I knew what I was doing, because it takes 2 to 3 years to
Right.
figure out what you're doing in the legislature
Right. And who to talk
and
to
who to
and who to
talk
get
to. And
involved. Yeah.
well, and to give yourself enough credibility that others will talk to you,
Right.
you know,
Uh-huh.
and so we're starting to see, especially on the west side of Utah County, because I've been the chair of the Utah County legislators,
Uh-huh.
the caucus there,
Right.
um, for most of the time that I've been serving,
Uh-huh.
and either on the House side or the Senate side.
Right.
And we've worked really hard to get, and where we have now is $1.5 billion are programmed for new roads on the west side. Now that will start to hit this next year. You'll start to see a lot more construction on the west side,
Mm-hmm.
and then it'll be
Does that include
huge.
like the 2100
So
North project over
2100 is
here?
one of them.
Bless you for that. It
And
is so bad
and
over here.
and it's not like something that one legislator can
Right.
do. It's a team effort,
Oh, it'd have to be.
and you have to move in concert, and you have to and you have to do it in a way that doesn't alienate your colleagues who are in
Mm-hmm.
different areas that have their needs.
Right.
It's a more delicate political thing than people realize. But I'll tell you, like Stephanie Grecius has been fantastic.
Yep.
Kay Christopherson
Uh-huh.
is a champion in that, and we've been able to do a lot. And stepping into the Senate side, that's been a big deal on trying to push more of those dollars there. And we've got 2029 is when the biggest chunk of that money will hit
Okay.
into the west side. Now, that's too little too late,
Yeah.
but you could see the problems. And that's where, like 10 years out,
Uh-huh.
as soon as I got in, I'm like, if we don't get the west side right, the east side will suffer. All that
Right.
freeway congestion will get untenable,
Yeah.
even beyond where it is now. And so we've been able to move that schedule up because it was scheduled even further out, and we've been able to pull it
Yeah.
up a little bit.
Well, just one example here. I mean, I don't know if you probably drove up Main Street or something, but Pioneer Crossing over
Yeah.
here, they've been working on it for the last, I think, year and a half.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, people are like, well, they just need to fix the roads, but that takes some real time.
Yeah.
And so I think that's what you're talking about too with that 10 years is they've got to plan it, they've got to study it, they've got to make sure it's going to work. And then,
Yeah. I mean, there's an initial study, an environmental study, then there's a bunch of legal challenges, and then, for environmental
Right.
issues.
and then it takes them
then
2 or
the
3 years to
funding,
put it in.
and the funding and all
Yeah.
of the condemnation of property along the lane. Like it's a lot of work. It takes 10 years, and we're just about to see the fruits of that. And I've been working really hard on that more as a countywide issue.
Right.
And so, there's other things that I've been focusing on. I really care a lot about fiscal responsibility.
Mm-hmm.
So from the time that I've been in the legislature, I was on what's called the Infrastructure and General Government Committee,
Mm-hmm.
and they control the amount of debt. And last year, we became the lowest debt holding state in America.
Oh, wow.
And that's something that we've been
Mhm.
that I've been focusing on since I got in, to just drive that debt amount, that debt
Mhm.
percentage down. And we're on a path to have no debt. Now, there may be an interest rate environment where it makes sense to take on debt and do big projects.
Right.
That's okay, but you want to do it intentionally.
Right.
And so, by decreasing the amount of debt, and then by incremental tax cuts, which,
Mhm.
I've been on a lot of the rev and tax committees. If we do them incrementally, we can grow the economy faster than we lose revenue.
Right.
And that's been something where, you kind of have to choose which philosophy you're going to be in.
Mm-hmm.
Does a family know more about their budget, or do you? And I believe that the families need to have as much of their money as possible. And, we're not necessarily libertarians. There are good things that government does.
Right.
We do good things and we do them right. And Utah's really good at that. But it's a pain to have growth.
Uh-huh.
And with that growth should come a lower tax rate
Right.
because you're growing the whole economy when
Right.
you're growing.
There are things that we share.
Yeah.
And there are more people to
There
share
should
it.
be an efficiency
Yeah.
that's built in. And we've been able to prove with tax cuts 6 years in a row that we can have a more efficient government that actually grows in revenue beyond the growth rate despite cutting the tax rate.
Right.
And so, we've been able to get a lot of things right, which is like with that growth over the past 10 years, so that a little bit preceding me, we've gone from 4.3 million to public education out of state dollars or 4.3 billion out of state dollars to 8.6 billion, a 100% increase over 10 years.
Right.
And at the same time, we've had a rate of inflation of 38% and a rate of growth for our enrollment of 3.8%.
Oh, wow.
So we are like only 42% is what would be adjusting to inflation and growth.
Right.
The remaining 58% is all new money in addition to inflation
Right.
for public education while cutting taxes. Those are the types of things that I absolutely love and that I'm passionate about. We can create great wins all around on this.
That's awesome. I'd love to dive more into it. We only have so much time, but yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to start diving into some of these questions.
Yeah.
And see where we get. The first one is, how do you define the proper role of government, and where do you draw the line between what the government should do versus what should be left to individuals or the private sector?
Yeah. So I start out, there's a few layers to this. On the proper role of government, first of all, the government is to protect the individual rights set forth in our Constitution. And so we start out with the government has that protective role. Now, I'm not going to get into the federal government's responsibilities, national.
I'm not
defense,
going
all of
to
that.
either, as a matter of fact. A lot of people are like, well, ask them who they voted for president or whatever. And
Sure.
I want to know how you operate as a legislator and how you think about these things, right? So, yeah.
Yeah. So I start out with, is it, what is the state supposed to stay out of? And are we creating policies that keep us out of that?
Right.
People have negative rights. And what I mean by that is rights to keep the government out of their lives.
Right.
Like the negative right of free speech. The government cannot control your speech.
Right.
Or, those kinds of things. Then there are rights that we have decided we will provide. So, for example, the 10th Amendment or the 10th Article 10 of Utah's Constitution provides that each child shall have a public education.
Right.
So we're going to provide that.
Yep.
And then there's kind of a baseline of success by which people can operate in their lives with more freedom. So, and what I look at for that is like roads, utilities, things like that, clean water. Like we have got to get those things right.
Right.
We can be partisan all day long, but if you don't have roads that people can operate in their lives and you don't have clean water and power at a good energy rate, like we're not doing it right. None of the partisanship matters. If
public safety,
getting the police and prisons right and everything that way. So those are, getting our court system right. All of those things are core essentials that we need to create enough revenue to support those.
Right.
Through taxation, which I don't like taxes, but there's a balancing act on what we all agreed as a social contract to provide
has to be paid for,
and taxes. And so that's kind of like, what is the proper role of government? It's that. Now you get into, what about social services? Now, that's a harder one because the line gets a little fuzzier. And I'll tell you where I draw the line on when we should be stepping in to assist in social services. First of all, there's one principle, and that is your tax policy is not your social service policy.
Okay.
And what I mean by that is, if you say we're not going to apply any taxes to people that make less than this amount, you're trying to do it as a social service issue. And that isn't very effective.
Right.
If you want to help poor people, help them directly.
Right.
But don't try to do it through their tax, because what you end up doing is there's a bunch of loss, and like it's bad tax theory, because you get mostly like college kids that they're not poor, they're temporarily poor, and they're going to be fine. And and I'm a believer that you get responsible citizens when they have to share in the burden of taxation.
Okay.
And the more you can spread that out on a broad-based low rate level, like every single tax theory that's ever been devised that works is on a broad-based low rate.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it starts to fall apart.
Right.
And so I really like Utah's flat tax system,
Mm-hmm.
and where it's applied very broadly. Okay, so that's the first principle. Tax policy is not welfare policy.
Right.
Second principle is welfare policy is the second principle with welfare policy is, can the person make market decisions?
Mm-hmm.
If they are unable to make market decisions, it is appropriate for the state to assist. So
Okay.
if you're talking about the mentally ill,
Okay.
the disabled,
Uh-huh.
those who, so for example, if you were to try to apply for the military and you have an IQ of less than 75 or 80,
Uh-huh.
they won't take you.
Right.
They have every incentive to take you, but they have decided that you are not capable of following directions, or in
Right.
my words, making market decisions.
Right.
And there's probably some place for the state to help you. Now, if you are capable of making market decisions and you're just really bad at it,
Mm-hmm.
that's an accountability
Yeah,
issue
that's
that the
different.
state doesn't step in. But I support the state mental hospital. I
Mm-hmm.
support caring for those that are disabled, and helping with those families that when they have a disabled child, it should not be something that is so detrimental to the family that that the state can't help a little on
Right.
that. And so, the DSPD list, we do need to and I've pushed
The
to
SPD.
so that's the it's like a let's see, disabled services for pediatric. There's
Okay.
I'm messing up the acronym. It's basically when you have a severely disabled child,
Uh-huh.
there are dollars available to assist,
Okay.
but there's a waiting list for people that are waiting for those dollars to help.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's about having a caretaker come in and care for a child, things like that.
Right.
We have got to get that right, and we have to
Mm-hmm.
support those families. Um, and so I've worked really hard within our caucus and within the legislature to decrease the number of people on that list. And we've really made some good strides on that.
Okay.
So there's elements of welfare that we need to fight for and help.
Mm-hmm.
And there's other elements that are more subject to abuse,
Okay.
and we have to be very careful. And
Right.
we're better about catching that than say Minnesota.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
All right. Some of the examples that people bring to me are things like funding sports arenas or developing resorts or dictating housing density for local communities. So,
Yeah.
so is that the role of government?
Um, on housing density for local communities, it generally should not be.
Okay.
Now, there is a point where, you've got 258 cities, and are you going to have a couple that are going to be abusive towards the private property rights of citizens?
Uh-huh.
And that can happen, and we do have to regulate in that space.
Right.
And there is a fine line between private property rights and city powers, municipal powers.
Right.
So, for example, a few years ago, I was very supportive of the ADU, the accessory dwelling units, allowing people to live in your home as renters.
Oh, okay.
Because it's your home. You should be able to choose if you want another family to live there or not. I viewed that as a private property right.
So you're talking like if I wanted to rent my basement or
Yeah,
something.
exactly. And the cities were fairly against it.
Uh-huh.
But I felt like that was something that was appropriate for the property owner. And, we have large families in large homes in Utah, and then those families leave,
Right.
and you have people that are looking for an income source for a home that's bigger than they need.
Right.
And they shouldn't have to move in every circumstance.
Right.
They could rent out their basement, and it's the same number of people essentially that
Right.
are using the home, but they have an income source.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's one where it's appropriate because they have a private property right that they live in the home. They're
Right.
not just leaving it to the city to clean up, problems that can be there with renters versus
Right.
owners. It's a
Mm-hmm.
homeowner living
Right.
there. They should be able to do what they want within
Yep.
the walls of their home. Now there's been other proposals from the state to try to take over zoning entirely, which I entirely do not support.
Right.
I think it was the Beehive Commission or something like that. The
Mm-hmm.
Cox administration has been more forceful pushing towards that. And, I can tell you that I've done everything I can do to kill it, and we've killed it 2 times in a row. And I will
Yep.
continue to do that,
Right.
from the Senate. And so, yeah, we, as far as like that's kind of the balance. You're
Uh-huh.
always balancing abuse towards private property rights versus cities have got to be able to make the community
Right.
have the flavor that that community wants and that they
Mm-hmm.
elected their leaders to have.
Right.
And then, whether it's sports stadiums, some of it depends on the area that they're going to be improving and whether they're going to be taking state dollars or just foregoing taxes for the improvements that they bring to the area.
Okay.
And there's a little bit of a difference there
Uh-huh.
versus giving them money versus they create more value and do they
Right.
keep more of the value that they create?
Okay.
And then who owns it after if you're going to allow
Right.
that to happen, and so if they're going to retain ownership, then they should pay for it. If they're going
Uh-huh.
to if that's going to be an asset of the state,
Right.
then you look at whether that makes sense as an asset
Uh-huh.
of the state. So
Right.
there's some things you got to look at, but that's more of a case by case scenario.
Okay. Um, Getting into that a little further, Utah's invested nearly $1 billion in the Smith Entertainment Group for the Delta Center. MIDA, originally created for housing on Hill Air Force Base. I can't remember what MIDA stands for. Military
Yeah, Military Installation
Installation
Development
Development.
Authority,
Yeah, something like that. Is now giving tax deferments to help build hotels at Sundance and the Mayflower development. And PIDs allow unelected corporate board members to access public bonding and vote on taxes. So are these relationships the proper role of government, and how do you prevent corporatism from influencing future decisions?
I think generally no. I think they've gone a little too far, a lot too far. I'm last year I ran the first successful bill to bring any sense of additional accountability to PIDs.
Uh-huh.
And that was to require them rather than hold their meetings, at their law firm's office,
Right.
to hold them in the location nearest the residents who could be impacted by the
You want to
PIDs.
explain for the audience what PIDs are?
So PIDs are public infrastructure districts, and so the essentially it's saying we're going to assess the taxes differently to allow for those taxes to help pay for the infrastructure within the area of the PID.
Infrastructure meaning like sewer,
Sewer and
water,
all of that.
electric,
And
curbs,
yeah,
roads.
and
Yeah.
sometimes that could make sense. It could. Like I said, again, it depends on who owns it and how useful it will be outside of that,
Right.
that infrastructure area, and what would be the opportunity cost of not doing it
Right.
as well. But it certainly needs more transparency and more guidelines. I don't know that it would be very difficult to remove entirely. I know a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people would want to do that, but I can tell you it'd be tough. You'd
Okay.
need a lot of different people in place. But I think if you go back and look at the voting, you would see that like Senator Baldry and me are probably the more critical ones of PID in the Senate, of PIDs and those types
Right.
of projects. Yeah.
What do you do about some of the other ones like MIDA setting up hotels and
Yeah, I mean I've seen that at Sundance. I don't know that they needed that. I think it was a sweetheart deal to some degree. I didn't. The thing about MIDA is it operates without it coming back to the legislature to look at.
right?
So we don't see it, approve it, or anything like that at this point.
Uh-huh.
And so, but there's also some influences on it that would be pretty tough to overcome right now in the current environment.
Okay.
And so I think it just needs a little time in order to start making some headway on bringing a little more structure and regulation on that. Corporatism is a real thing, and we have to watch for it. We want to encourage corporations to succeed, but it should not be the government that is the linchpin for that success.
Right. Utah is facing some serious competing pressures on water. Data centers consume a lot of water. The high density housing mandates are accelerating population concentration. What do we do about water? And then there's also a concern that somebody raised where there's the UN's One Water agenda that calls for international standards, AI oversight, metering, consolidation of water management, that kind of a thing. So how does that start to play in or not play in with what we're dealing with?
Yeah, I mean, anytime you have a limited resource,
Uh-huh.
you need to have appropriate pricing on the resource.
Uh-huh.
So there's a thing called the tragedy of the commons, which
Uh-huh.
is, an unmeasured or a free resource will be overconsumed until it is depleted.
Right.
That's the basic idea. And so, I'm not necessarily opposed to metering water.
Mm-hmm.
Like measuring water is fine. I don't think
Right.
that's a UN conspiracy.
Right.
That's just knowing what you're using.
Fair enough.
Now with regards to any of the UN other stuff, we have a really different water environment than most places in the
Mm-hmm.
world. And so I don't know how applicable it is to us.
Right.
We certainly don't want to have an outside, we want our natural resources controlled by Utahns.
Yeah.
That's the number one principle overall. I'm not sure how applicable the UN's plans
Okay.
would be within that framework, within
Mm-hmm.
our resources, but we want to control it no
Right.
matter what. So there's that point. But then let's talk about, how do we deal with some of the water issues? Number one, I think that AI usage has gotten a little bit blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
The earlier ones used water for cooling.
Uh-huh.
That's a pretty old technology, and none
Okay.
of the newer ones are using water.
Okay.
And a lot of that is because the water is too expensive here.
Oh, okay.
They have to compete to purchase that from land developers.
Uh-huh.
And so in a housing crisis, the if they can do it with air or with through
Mm-hmm.
other cooling means, then they're going to do that.
Okay.
And so we haven't had one for quite a while. I think Eagle Mountain has a fairly extensive one,
I
and
think
then
theirs is, yeah.
and then the one at the military base right here at Camp Williams
Uh-huh.
is a water cooled one.
Right.
We and so I can't
Mm-hmm.
fix those. Those have been in place for quite
Right.
a while.
Yeah.
But the ones that are
I had
going
one
in,
lady that at the last central committee meeting, she came up. They're building, I guess, like 3 of them in Santaquin, and so her big concerns were water and power.
yeah, and I don't think any of those are water ones that I've heard
Okay.
of. I haven't heard of any new ones in that,
I don't know
with
how they
regard to that.
operate, so
Now, power, that's something we can do, and I'm a believer that Utah needs to be a power exporter.
mm-hmm.
And we are. Like we get low rates on our power because California makes dumb decisions and we sell them power.
Right.
Okay? And it's a really beautiful thing.
Right.
And I would love to, the governor has a goal to double our power. I think we can quadruple it, especially
Uh-huh.
if we can get the small nuclear modular reactors coming online. But our geothermal is fantastic. We've made some of the first test runs of that, and it's viable and really doable. And that one uses some water, but it is a looped water system, so it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't deplete it. It just kind of evaporates and
Right.
evaporates and condensates back and forth. And we have plentiful resources, in terms of natural gas and coal, and
Mm-hmm.
we should be using those, and we can do that cleanly and in the right areas. And doing that for AI and having it, which doesn't have a huge footprint for most of it,
Mm-hmm.
where you can have it further out. All they need is the internet connection.
Right.
If you can put power out there with them and you don't have to run the transmission line,
Uh-huh.
you're in a pretty good spot.
That's true.
And that's not land that's being used
Mm-hmm.
for any other productive purpose. Most of it is either grazing land,
Mm-hmm.
and there's plenty of grazing land, but there's
Yeah.
nothing else out there in the sagebrush areas.
Yeah, my father-in-law, so he lives out in Emory County,
Yeah.
and yeah, he texted me when they're building a nuclear plant out here, right out in Orangeville. Which if you don't know where Orangeville is, go out to Price, head south, you'll find it if you don't blink.
Yeah.
It's a really small town, but yeah, and so and then it turned out that a lot of that is earmarked for data centers they're putting out there.
Yeah.
And it was, hey, we don't want to pay for power off the grid. We don't want to, and so they're trying to be power neutral and water neutral and all that stuff. And I thought that was fairly interesting. And yeah, I was like, well, yeah, we're doing this other places with nuclear.
Well, and we need to remember that, Utah is kind of operates as two different economies.
Uh-huh.
There's the Wasatch Front and St. George, which
Right.
are similar in their makeup. And then rural Utah is economically way behind.
Yeah.
And so getting
Yeah. Out
industry
that
out
area, it's
off of the Wasatch Front,
coal and natural
yeah,
gas
and that's what they play to,
and
and
agriculture.
it's a great thing for them.
Hmm.
Like that's going to help a lot of those counties, do well. And if we want to get population off the Wasatch Front, that's going to be a
Right.
big part of it.
Yeah. Yeah, because people like me could go out there and work there as a tech guy.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
So
So yeah, so as far as the rest of the water management stuff goes, I mean, we hear about like saving the Great Salt Lake, or whether or not we're gonna have water to water our lawns, or if we have people keep moving here, we're gonna water for just normal living stuff, and we've got the agriculture. So
yeah.
how do we tackle some of that stuff?
So there's a few things. You know, Number one, we need to have a little bit of humility as to what government can and can't do.
Right. You can't make it rain.
We
Is that what
can't
you're
make it
saying?
rain. We still need prayer. We
Uh-huh.
still need God to send rain.
Yeah.
Okay. Additionally, we can be grateful for our forebears that in the 1930s built a bunch of reservoirs
Mm-hmm.
that created years of water storage for personal use
Right.
that we can survive for a long time without good rain years.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've changed a lot of how the water will flow down to the Great Salt Lake. We've allowed more, so it's not a use it or lose it system as much. We can
Mm-hmm.
we can let water through to the Great Salt Lake. But and that once we have several normal years and good years in a row, you'll see a lot of those improvements just over time. But that's going to take a few years.
Right.
Like we can't just be like, and no one uses water. It all goes to the Great Salt Lake now because we
Mm-hmm.
decided that's the crisis.
Right.
And so we've got to be a little bit patient on that. Now we can do other things. There's reallocation of water rights, dedications of water rights. We're seeing a lot of that being, we're going to be okay. And water rights are different than property rights in that those are controlled by the state
Mm-hmm.
engineer. And if things get so bad that it's, threatening life, then the guideline is essentially people, then animals, then crops,
Okay.
or and
Mm-hmm.
businesses. And so, that's kind of the framework if worse comes to worse.
Right.
But we can have good measures and take care and be good stewards of our water. We're going to be okay.
Okay.
It takes a little time
Mm-hmm.
and a few water cycles, and we'll be in a great place.
All right. Um, you kind of touched on this already, and so I'll just go through it, and then you can.
Yeah.
Um, but until recently, Utah has been considered a local control state. Now, state mandates are overriding city zoning and planning decisions, and the state spent $2 million in taxpayer money on commercials promoting what it calls a housing shortage. So, who should have the final say on local planning, zoning, and housing, the cities or the state?
Yeah. I mean, the default should be the cities.
Mm-hmm.
The state steps in when there's abuse.
Okay.
That's the short line, and I don't love the idea of, ad campaigns run by government.
Yeah, that was the other question: is should Utah have a version of the Smith-Munt Act preventing taxpayer funds being used on government PR campaigns?
Yes. Yeah, it should. There's educational campaigns to
Mm-hmm.
help with things, but there's a difference on
Right.
advocacy versus education.
All right. Utah's surveillance infrastructure is growing rapidly. License plate readers that issue automated tickets. I think we got rid of those.
Yeah, we don't have automated tickets.
Expanded monitoring, and with the 2034 Olympics approaching, significant additional surveillance build out is expected, just as occurred with the previous Utah Olympics. So, do you believe people have an inherent right to privacy in public spaces? And where specifically do you draw the line on government surveillance tools?
So Representative Chevrier has done a really good job in this space, and she's got her eye on a lot of the privacy issues out there. And so I really appreciate the work that she's done. There is a tension between in public spaces, what can be observed and recorded
Mm-hmm.
versus what you have a right to. Now, I think the way that this is starting to resolve, because you solve enough crimes using cameras in public spaces,
Mm-hmm.
they start to feel pretty valuable to law enforcement,
Right.
you know.
But
But at the same
yeah,
time, you know, how long are you retaining that data, and how searchable is that data, and you know,
right.
and so what
Right, because that
representative,
that opens it up to abuse,
because
right?
now
So
it's opened up to
now
abuse.
now I can see, okay, Brady Brammer went from here to here to here to here, even though he didn't commit a crime, but I'm
Correct.
interested because I have reasons.
You know, and what are you doing with that data? So are you
Yeah.
interested because you can sell that data to, you
Yeah,
know, a
that's
marketer
another issue.
that can
Yeah.
understand it? Like, so is the state selling your data? And so we've created the Office of Data Privacy,
Mm-hmm.
and that's from a conservative perspective been a really good thing.
Uh-huh.
And so we've started to create some guidelines on how to deal with data, not just, you know, surveillance data, but data like how much of what you have that you have to submit to the state becomes available, and what do they do with it, and how
Right.
do they deal with it, you know. But getting back to the surveillance side, where we're starting to see it resolve into is, okay, you can do your license plate reader, you can have some cameras in public places,
Uh-huh.
but there is a drop off period whereby that data needs to go away unless there's an open investigation related to a specific individual or vehicle, you know,
Right.
within that framework. And so I think last year they put it at like 120 days or 90 days, something
Okay.
like that. Uh, and uh, and I think that we'll continue to tighten that up.
Uh-huh.
But that's become an area that Representative Chevrier has just let out on and done a great job with. And she keeps pushing, and she'll
Mm-hmm.
just keep getting her way because she's persistent like that,
Yeah, she is.
you know, and it's great. So,
Yeah.
you know, we're going in the right direction. But you are balancing that
Mm-hmm.
public safety and that surveillance
Right.
thing. And I don't think it's all for one or the other.
Yeah. I think a lot of the, like, if there's a conflict of ideas within a lot of the questions, it's going to be down to that, right?
Yeah.
What rights do you have, right?
Mm-hmm.
What should you be allowed to do? What expectations should you be able to have? And then on the other side, there's the public good, like what comes out of this that's positive, you know, and how do you balance that out, right? when
Yeah.
when does when does this trump that, or you know, maybe this idea is like freedom of speech, right? It's
Yeah.
just, it's like, we'll never violate
Yeah.
this, right? And so on the other side, it's like, okay, so what are the costs and to that,
Yeah.
and how do you figure that out? So
Yep.
so yeah, and it's really fascinating just to see how this all kind of comes through. Um, the Build Coordinating Council is made up of NGOs appointed by the executive branch, including MAG, which is the Mountain Land Association of Governments, UAC, which is the Utah Association of Counties, and the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and a bunch of other ones. They advise on policy, and then that often gets pushed through the legislature as mandates on local government and other things. Utah's recent legislation also appears in some ways to parallel UN's Agenda 2030 in areas like housing density, mass transit, surveillance, and water management. And the legislature has increasingly deferred to national and international standards in areas like water, construction, wildland, and energy policy. So, is this a coincidence, innovation, a sovereignty concern? And what specifically would you do to ensure that elected officials and not unelected bodies or outside frameworks are driving Utah policy?
So there's a couple of, the premise of the question has a couple of problems. Like,
Okay.
those aren't NGOs. Like, the MAG is not an
MAG is,
NGO.
yeah, technically not.
That's a federal program
Right.
that
They
that's
fund
how
projects around here. Yeah.
that's how federal dollars for roads come in
Mm-hmm.
and get planned. And
Okay.
that's set up by the federal government under statute.
Okay.
And then like Utah League of Cities and Towns is the cities create that
Uh huh.
to, you know, that's their group to represent cities as a whole.
Right.
And UAC is
The
that
same thing
for,
for the
yeah,
counties.
so they're not exactly like NGOs that you would
Right.
think of as a nonprofit,
Right.
something like, so, you know, they're just representatives of government groups that get together,
Right.
which is like a right to assembly issue
Yeah,
even,
the
you know.
concern that I hear though is that often they don't have the right idea on what needs to be done, and yet they still kind of throw their weight around a little bit and have some clout in some circles to
Yeah.
get their
Yeah.
way, and that hurts us.
It can. The citizens in the cities or the counties are not always on the same
Right.
page, and sometimes they're being heavily influenced by, Salt Lake City may have a bigger influence within the Utah League of Cities and Towns, and
Uh-huh.
Salt Lake County may have a bigger influence than other counties and cities
Right.
want to have. Um, okay, so as far as like the build council, there's a few things in that question.
Uh-huh.
Um, it's fine for them to have an advocacy group
Yeah.
or a group that tries to do plans. That's
Mm-hmm.
appropriate.
Right.
That's and they should be able to influence the legislature just like anybody else. And if and we do give some level, we give a pretty big ear to those that are other elected officials,
Mm-hmm.
and who they send as their
Right.
representatives, and that's appropriate. But we also say no a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times. There's plenty of times where the League of Cities and Towns doesn't get their way, or
Mm-hmm.
UAC doesn't get their way, and other times where they do.
Right.
This last year, UAC and the League of Cities and Towns killed several property tax cut proposals
Mm-hmm.
that that weren't quite as fleshed out as they needed to be,
Right.
and maybe didn't provide what they needed to be able to function and provide those core nuts and bolts issues. And so, I don't know that it's necessarily anything nefarious. They do have an outsized
Mm-hmm.
influence, but that's because within every one of our districts, there's elected mayors and city council
Mm-hmm.
members and county commissioners that are behind all of that,
Right.
that have their own reasons for being elected, and they're trying to solve problems and influence us so that they can solve their problems. Now, as to international standards, I don't think that wholesale acceptance of international standards is ever appropriate.
Right.
There are building standards that, because a lot of the building supplies and the training follow the building standards,
Mm-hmm.
we oftentimes adopt them and then exempt parts of it.
Okay.
So if you go into like the Business and Labor Committee, that's where that comes through. And I was on
Uh-huh.
that committee for quite a while. We would always adopt the international standard subject to the following, which we do not adopt. And it had things like, water heater, trying to get rid of gas water
Uh-huh.
heaters, and like things like
Right.
that were a little more agenda driven
Right.
than is appropriate. Now, if you're talking about, use this type of insulation within a building, that
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have this type of fire problem, like fire
Right.
codes are generally to stop fire. And,
Yeah.
like there's some good reason to have good fire
Okay.
codes, and good reasons to have good building codes. But you do have to have a thoughtful eye on it, on what's agenda driven versus others, because
Mm-hmm.
there are some agendas in there.
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
Um. So the legislative session,
Yeah.
a lot happens in not a lot of time.
Yep.
So it's often too fast to fully read every bill. You get leadership bills that come with political and financial consequences for dissent. I've at least seen some instances that look that way. Some leadership controls a PAC funded by uh, various groups that they, give money to some campaigns and not others. Um, you also have a lot of last minute stuff that happens. So if the last minute in the 2025 session, they sold a chunk of the Great Salt Lake to the federal government.
Yeah.
The rules are often suspended at the end of the session to get bills to go through. HB 48 collaborated with insurance companies and the DNR to redraw fire district lines, and that caused rate increases and policy cancellations for homeowner owners. That's one example. So what's your personal standard for voting on legislation? And do you have the courage to vote no on a leadership bill, an omnibus bill, or any bill that you haven't had adequate time to read and understand?
Yeah. So I do read all of the bills,
Okay.
and I actually have programs on my computer to show me exactly, it highlights automatically where there are changes to the code. And
Uh-huh.
I'm familiar enough with the code to know like how those changes will work
Mm-hmm.
within the code.
Okay.
And so I do read every bill. And something else that people don't understand that kind of comes with experience is you need to get a read on each bill.
Yeah.
And oftentimes that means, okay, do you have systems in place for dissenting votes in committee,
Uh-huh.
which committee it went to, who's the sponsor, and what their agendas or what the nature of how they operate is?
Okay.
And by looking at who's dissenting, Now you can go and ask questions, or you can say, if Nate Bluen's dissenting, I'm probably in favor of this bill, versus if I see that, if I look at, like, if Kay Christopherson or Kristen Chevrolet or Corey Malloy
Uh-huh.
or, the representatives in this Senate district are dissenting, I better go figure out why,
Right.
if it's coming over. And so getting a read on each bill is just as important as reading the bill.
Mm-hmm.
And that just requires knowing each person and what they care about, and knowing the process really well. And that takes 2 or 3 years, if not 4 or 5 years, within the legislature to
Right.
get to that point. So that's important. Now, are there politics at the legislature? Yes.
Uh-huh.
I've never seen anything tied to, like, PAC funding or anything like that.
Okay.
Like, that's never been. In fact, we really, like, there's no talking about funding, and there's no ability to receive donations during the session.
Right.
Now, there's, you certainly have, like, leadership will lean on you
Uh-huh.
sometimes on stuff,
Right.
but, I'm not a very good person to lean on. I think what I think, and they know that I'm willing to pay the consequence for not
Right.
doing that. I mean, for years I had Brad Wilson not loving how I operated, and, refusing to give me, like, positions for a while.
Yeah.
And then as soon as he left the legislature, I become the rules chair,
Right.
because my colleagues respected me a lot, but I had a Speaker of the House that maybe didn't like the way that I operated,
Right.
because I wouldn't go along with
Mm-hmm.
things, and I think the Senate's a little easier to do what you want to do in the Senate. We're a little more free as cats, generally.
Okay.
And you can see that in, like, a lot of the omnibus bills I was voting against.
Uh-huh.
And so, there are politics, and the rules do get suspended, and sometimes for good reason.
Okay.
The I don't think the selling part of that portion of the Great Salt Lake was as controversial as people try to make it out to be.
I don't know if enough about it to.
It was like it was already a conserved area, and rather than us pay to fix some remediation on it, we got the federal government to pay for it and
Okay.
conserve it in the same way we would have. And so it wasn't like the
I
anything.
brought it up because it came up in other places, and I was okay.
I never
yeah.
viewed it as all that tough,
Okay.
but and so there are things that that maybe don't follow the process as well as it should,
Mm-hmm.
and there are things that that maybe are misrepresented, probably not intentionally at times, or you just get the analysis of effect wrong.
Right.
I think that fire one was one that we got wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and this last year we had to come back and adjust it, like, in a big way,
Right.
because people were losing their insurance.
Yeah.
There was another one dealing with some of the stuff along for trails along the benches,
Uh-huh.
and so we basically got the Utah County Caucus together, and we berated the representative who did it, Casey Snyder,
Uh-huh.
who's really fun to berate.
Some
and-
people have that.
Yeah, he just has that,
Yeah.
and so and then we worked with DNR to stop enforcing. They wanted everyone to have fishing or hunting licenses to walk on, like, the
Oh, I
Bonneville
think I heard
Shoreline
about
Trail.
this. Yeah.
Yeah, and so what we did was we worked on it and said, you don't need to enforce this, and we're going to change it in the legislative session. And we did. Stratton and Schallenberger changed that this last year, so that's not part of it. But
Yeah,
we
I
got
think
them
I
to
see- I
stop
think I saw, like,
enforcement.
Social media post where some guy was saying they won't let me on the trail
Yeah,
because
and so we got them to stop enforcing and take down their signs, and that was us not doing legislation, working to fix a problem that was an unintended consequence,
right.
and working with the agency and the bill sponsor and everything to fix it in the meantime, because it wasn't right.
Right.
And that happens. Like, there's going to be a few bills that you just don't get the full consequences of, but you've got to be willing to go and work on it and get it right. And that's part of the legislative process. You've got to be humble enough to know that you're going to get some things wrong,
Yep.
and admit it when you do.
Sometimes that's hard, especially when a lot of people are going to see that.
Yeah, it is. But that's, like, it's meant to be humbling, because you bring an idea forward. You're like, here's my idea, and everyone tells you how stupid your idea is, and that's good. And that's how it's supposed to be. And you got to get humble real fast and figure out, well, is there any part of the idea that is redeemable?
Right.
And then you usually get something a lot better by the end. And,
Yep.
And so, the Utah Lake Authority was trashed up and down
Mm-hmm.
when I first brought it forward.
Yep.
And I worked for a year meeting with, having hundreds of meetings. And now it's become one of the most successful programs to improve a state natural resource that, that we've ever had.
Uh-huh.
It's doing so good, and it's in coordination with all of the different government entities, that it's just a hub to help that coordination effort, and pull down more
Right.
dollars and resources. And it was an idea that wasn't perfect at the beginning, and it just got better and better
Mm-hmm.
as time went on.
Yep. All right, let me ask you about the signature path in SB
Yeah.
54. How do you feel? What do we do about it?
Gosh, I think there needs to be, uh, at some level, we've got to get to a point where we can compromise between those that are in favor of signatures,
Mm-hmm.
because there's a real risk that if you just, I would vote to repeal SB 54, but I do worry that if you did that, then you immediately get an initiative
Right.
that kills the caucus system.
I've heard that concern from a number of people.
And it's because that's the threat
Right.
at times. And so, you have to be careful what you wish for, because, if we went back to a pure caucus system, I think we get a lot more participation in caucus.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's a much better system because you can have deeper level conversations. And, the difference between running in convention is I talked to, you know, 257 delegates,
Right.
and I work with them, and they see my ideas and they tell me their concerns, and I'm learning the whole time and learning to care about things that I didn't think about before.
Right.
It's wonderful. I go to the primary or I go to a general election and it's mostly a mailer
Mm-hmm.
contest, and that's not okay.
Right.
That's not the superior system. So there is a problem there, but we need to find a place that everyone can be okay with.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's it could be something along the lines of the thresholds need to be adjusted. It could be something along the lines of, you know if a signature gathering candidate doesn't get at least a minimum of X in
Mm-hmm.
convention, then they don't move forward.
Right.
Like there could be, several things along those lines. And so, but we've got to get the people that care about both sides to find a way to resolve the concerns. And I
Yeah.
don't know that we've got the right idea yet.
Right. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it seems cut and dried on the surface because it's like them and us.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get into some of this and it's like, okay, but yeah, what are all the consequences of what we do? And
Yeah. Yeah, and it doesn't need to be them and us.
right.
There's
That's true
there's
too.
like there are paths to really good candidates and policy that everyone should be able to agree
Mm-hmm.
on. We are still a
Right.
big tent party in a lot of
Mm-hmm.
ways. Like, now there's everyone can have their flavor of how pure or conservative they want people to be,
That stuff drives me nuts.
but that's
Yeah.
but if you start really talking to people, and that's one of the great things about the delegate system, is you get a wider array than people think is
Mm-hmm.
there, and you start to see that there are certain issues that everyone falls differently on. And now it's less about, are you pure on this set of issues,
Mm-hmm.
and more is it, are you workable in the sense that people feel like they can access you.
Right.
And now you're developing a relationship with delegates where they can access you even if they slightly disagree with you on X issue.
Right.
And that's the true value coming out of caucus as a candidate.
Mm-hmm.
You learn how to care about things you didn't care about. You learn how to talk to people that disagree with you and still be respectful.
Right.
And you learn how to be accessible to people throughout your entire community, that when they call you, like, you can prioritize their voice
Yeah.
a little bit more because they're a community leader. They were elected by
Mm-hmm.
their community as a delegate. And so, you know, I would hate to lose that connection to the district.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because you're talking about it this way. When I ran in the Senate 22 special election, I imported the entire delegate list into my phone.
Yeah.
And it's funny because now that I'm the vice chair of the party, I'll get a phone call and I'll be like, I don't know who this person
Well,
is.
look,
And
I
I'll
get,
answer it, and it's a
yeah,
delegate.
I have every delegate in my phone, and their middle name has been changed to
Oh, there
delegate,
you
and
go.
then the year that they were elected as a delegate.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And so that's how I keep track and how I prioritize delegates calling me,
Uh-huh.
because I can see that it's a delegate. And
Yeah.
so, yeah,
Yeah. But it's just funny because I still have that connection sometimes.
yeah.
Um, what about Prop 4 and the boundary issue?
We still got a lot of work to do on it.
Uh-huh.
I think there will have to be a new map in the next few years, because as soon as that injunction from Judge Gibson becomes a final injunction,
Uh-huh.
then we are tasked as a legislature under Prop 4 to have a new map. And there's a lot of litigation still to go in that. And then, not counting whether there needs to be, legislative fixes, constitutional fixes. It's a story that's going to be it needs to be written, but it's going to be a hard one on a lot of people politically. I mean, I don't think Burgess Owens retires unless that,
Yeah, that's
without
true.
that. Um, and I disagree with Prop 4. I disagree with the premise of it. I think it was right on the ballot when it says this is likely unconstitutional. And
Mm-hmm.
the way the courts have dealt with it is they have sidestepped the constitutional issues so far,
Right.
but they're coming up, and they're going to have to make some decisions on whether, can a chief justice who is tasked with deciding which map from the independent commission should be used, can that chief justice then sit in on opinions related to the maps, or do they have to recuse? Or, and the real issue is that a separation of powers
Right.
violation of our constitution?
Right.
And there's a lot of other problems in all of that, which, we tried to fix through compromise, and that's what was undone by the Supreme Court. But they didn't fix the underlying issues or do any
Right.
analysis as to whether the original Prop 4 was even constitutional.
Right.
So we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, it seems like that ought to be the first question, not the final question.
Yeah. Yep.
Um, the last one, and this one's I'm only asking Senate candidates because it only really applies to you.
Yeah.
The Senate holds the power of advice and consent over judicial nominations. We were kind of talking about this a second ago, but how meaningful is that power being exercised? Judge Gibson presided over the Prop 4 redistricting case. Um, we've seen some other issues come up in some of the other court cases. So, do you believe that the Senate is rigorously vetting judicial nominees for their judicial philosophy and commitment to constitutional boundaries, or is advice and consent becoming more of a rubber stamp? And what standard would you personally apply when confirming a judge?
So I think that they're much more rigorous now,
As opposed to,
as opposed to uh, since probably 2022.
okay,
After 2022, that's when we changed the nominating process on judicial. So Senator Collimore changed the nominating process and the makeup of those committees.
okay,
So that, because what was happening was, um, there's a couple of things. That nominating process, there were good judges that were playing keep away, so
uh-huh,
the governor couldn't even choose them.
okay,
So they put forth uh, judges to the governor, potential ones, and the governor had to choose from that list and could not send it back and could not choose from off the list.
oh, wow,
And so we redid the nominating
mm-hmm,
process so that the governor can ask for additional names, the governor can send the whole list back, and the makeup is more reflective of what the state is.
okay,
Before it was very bar heavy
yeah,
and court heavy.
that's what I understood too. Was the bar
Yeah.
association had an outsized
And
role in it?
and now as you're looking at like how that happens, I do a lot of, so I moved from, I was, I've been concerned about that, and I'm a
Mm-hmm.
litigation attorney, so I'm in the courts all the time.
Right.
Most of our district court judges are overworked, underpaid, and they're really good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Most of our court of appeal judges are overworked, underpaid, and really good at what they do.
Mm-hmm.
Our Supreme Court judges are underpaid, and they're good at what they do, but there's a judicial philosophy which I disagree with several of them.
Mm-hmm.
Since Tom Lee left, we've seen a very different judicial philosophy, which
Okay.
is more of a living constitution judicial philosophy.
Right.
It's and then it's kind of like a
That's been a
finding,
problem at the federal level too.
yeah, and it's like a finding the meaning that you want
Uh-huh.
and then backing into it with some justification out
Right.
there, as
So you
opposed
get
to,
emanations and penumbras or whatever it
yeah,
was with
yeah,
Roe versus Wade or some of these other
and so
things.
that, yeah, and so the other thing that has become a little different than what we used to have, uh, prior to, with our current U.S. Supreme Court, they have engaged in a much more federalism type analysis.
Uh-huh.
And so they've returned powers back to the state courts to decide,
Right.
meaning a lot of the more controversial issues are now with the states,
Okay.
whereas they used to be just with the feds. And that means that those controversial issues become much more meaningful, and the vetting of judges became more meaningful as we changed our U.S. Supreme
Right.
Court. So the Dobbs decision, which
Mm-hmm.
overturned Roe versus Wade, that returned that to the states.
Right.
It wasn't a state issue. No state Supreme Court was dealing with it at
Right.
all. And so, we need to vet our judges, but we have to be careful. We're not vetting for partisanship.
Right.
Like, they're not supposed to be Republican or Democrat
Mm-hmm.
or conservative or liberal.
Right.
We are vetting for judicial philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
Are they originalists and are they textualists, and do they mean it when they say it? Because they'll all
Right.
come and they'll tell us that they are.
Right.
And we've found out through tough experiences that some of them we don't feel like are particularly, adherent to the language. And do they use what's called judicial restraint,
Uh-huh.
meaning, people try to say that we have three separate but equal branches of government.
Mm-hmm.
That's not accurate. We have three branches of government. They are not
Right.
equal.
Right.
They have different powers, and by all accounts, the judiciary is meant to be the weakest branch.
Right.
And what that means is Article 1 of both the US Constitution and then it's Article 6 of Utah's Constitution for
Right.
the legislature. The legislature is meant to provide the policy,
Right.
and that means that to the greatest extent possible, the judiciary should be exercising judicial restraint from imposing policy onto what the legislature is doing.
Mm-hmm.
They're out of their lane. And so, you know, I work really hard to meet with judges, to talk to judges,
Mm-hmm.
to recruit people to apply, to get good senses of who they are. I go to different events of judicial groups to meet the
Mm-hmm.
attorneys that are out there that are interested in becoming judges, so that I can see whether they actually believe it when they say I'm an originalist, like Justice Thomas or
Right.
Justice Scalia or
Mm-hmm.
or Tom Lee. Like, I'm an
Right.
originalist like them, and I need to see that they're doing that before they apply.
Right.
And so I work really hard to get to know them as much as I can within that context, because I'm on the confirmation committee. That's why I
Mm-hmm.
moved, and they've put me to good use
Right.
on that committee to try to vet the judges as hard as I can.
Yep.
And some of them I've gotten wrong.
Mm-hmm.
After I'm like, I don't think we got that one right. And you learn some
Right.
lessons. It's a skill.
Right.
It's not like you just get it right on
Right.
like, this person it's like job interviewing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, people lie to you in job interviews. I'm not saying that the judges are lying, but they're very smart people,
Right.
and they know how
And
they
they
know
want
what
the
you
job.
want. They want the job, and they know what you want to hear.
Right.
And so you have to be very discerning, not unlike a delegate
Mm-hmm.
with elected candidates.
Right.
You've got to discern what they're really about.
Yeah.
And so you look at their past history as opposed to just what they're saying.
Yep. No, that makes a lot of sense. Just to give another example, in the same vein, learning kind of what you're looking for and what you want, and how it affects people. So my wife is the lunch director at a charter school,
Yeah.
and the first year she hired her team, and there were a number of them that just didn't quite work out, right?
Yeah.
And so when she hired new people, she was telling me, now I'm looking for X, Y, and Z.
Yep.
And she hired a new team, and there were one or two of those people that just weren't quite right either, right? And so is she hires to replace them because they're leaving,
Yep.
right? It's now I'm hiring for XYZ and ABC. And so, yeah, I can see where you're saying, you know what, I learned how to identify this. I learned how to figure it out. I'm getting better at it.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of thing that I think is so important, because I talk to people and I'm like, look, you may know all the things, or you may have all the principles right. I
Yeah.
said, I'm looking for the people that have the principles right more than the
Yeah.
people who know all the things.
Yep.
And so if you're willing to say, I screwed up, I'm going to do better, I'm going to figure this out, these are the things that matter. And so we're going to find a way through to them. I mean, those are the things that are important,
Yeah.
right? And then down to these questions, a lot of these questions are about, okay, how do you weigh that public good versus personal freedom? How do you start to evaluate, okay, is this the right thing or the wrong thing? How do I
Yep.
look at this and say, this is constitutional, this isn't,
Yep.
right? And is your philosophy, well, we'll pass it and the judicial fix it, versus we're not going to pass it because it's not
Yeah.
constitutional. And so all of those, that's what these questions, more than understanding what are
Yeah.
designed to find out.
It's your process. Yeah. And you've got to have some real backbone on what your process and principles are, because, one of my favorite sayings is, it's from a Greek philosopher: you can never step in the same river twice.
Mm-hmm.
And every single session, there's not a single thing that's exactly the same as before.
Right.
And so you are, hanging on in a fast flowing river, and all you've got are your principles and your process.
Right.
And once you're on the floor, all those outside influences go away. And it's just you trying to do the right thing
Mm-hmm.
according to your principles and your process.
Yeah.
And so, it's in its own way, it's an interesting, you learn a lot, and you learn a lot about yourself, and you learn a lot about not doing things just to make people happy,
Mm-hmm.
because you're never going to make them all happy. So
Right.
you might as well, make yourself be able to sleep at night because you did it the way that you felt was the right way to do it,
Right.
you know?
Yep, absolutely. So, I think that's all of my questions. There was one question I was going to ask earlier when we were talking about privacy. Maybe I'll throw that one in and then we
Yeah.
can wrap up.
Okay.
Um, so Utah pushed legislation that requires adults to photograph their driver's license in order to access certain online content in the name of protecting children. Do you see privacy concerns in that decision?
It depends on what happens with the ID, like
Okay.
how they handle it.
They
So
being the website you submitted to?
yeah.
Okay.
So if they, and I believe that the statute required them to destroy it after verification.
Okay.
And so that is generally fine. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's just like I don't view it like, you have ID for a reason,
Right.
to prove you are who you are. You are the
Mm-hmm.
age that you are, for
Right.
smoking, for drinking, for whatever it may be.
Right.
Like, that's totally appropriate. Now, what you do and how long you retain that data, if you give it to a bartender and they never give it back, or they may make a photocopy, like if
Mm-hmm.
you go rent a car, they make a photocopy.
Right.
That's no different there
Okay.
in terms of the net effect. But you don't necessarily want it sold
Right.
out there, a copy of your
Yeah.
driver's license sold out to the
Yeah.
to the public, or retained by that group to say, well, here, we now took everyone who looks like they want to apply for, well, we sold all of our driver's license data to of all the men to Rogaine so they can market to the bald guys, or
Right.
something like that. Like, that's not appropriate. No
Uh-huh.
offense, my friend.
Some of us bald guys have given up.
But that's like, you're definitely protecting on the back end. But we have ID for a reason, and that's to increase
Mm-hmm.
safety and to verify identification. And so we're living in an online world, and we can't pretend like we don't,
Right.
even with our ID.
Okay.
And I think there's going to be better ways to do it as we get our technology better, where it's a single, here's the ID, and you send it in, and the state verifies it and sends it back a yes or no,
Uh-huh.
so that's all the information they get.
Right.
And I think we can get to that point technologically, but we're not there yet.
Right. And there are a lot of privacy concerns with those systems as well.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a software developer, and this is the thing we deal with all the time.
Yeah.
Is who has it, who has control of it, who can get into it, who can search it, who can mine it, who can
Yeah.
use it. So
Yeah. So we're always protecting against abuse.
Yeah.
But we also, with the nature of data today, you can't pretend that you can operate without sharing data.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's that
Right.
balance issue of abuse versus what you actually share.
Right. All right. So the last two questions that I ask every candidate. The first one is, if you're reelected, who's your boss, and how do they hold you accountable? Or
Yeah.
another way to put it, how do you hold yourself accountable to them?
Yeah. So there's a couple of bosses when you're elected. Number one is you swear an oath to the Constitution
Mm-hmm.
of the United States and to the Constitution of Utah.
Mm-hmm.
And that is principally the first boss that you
Okay.
have when you swear that oath. Um, just because it makes people happy, you don't do unconstitutional things.
Right.
The second thing is you do have principles you ran on, and you need to live with yourself on those principles, even if your constituents disagree with you at times.
Mm-hmm.
You do not, we're not in a pure democracy. There's going to be times where you're not doing something that not everything you do will be over 50% threshold.
Right.
Um, but then the last thing is you are responsible to your constituents,
Mm-hmm.
to the people that vote, to the people that you represent, whether they vote or not. You are responsible to them, and they can hold you accountable. And so in that way, they are your boss. Now, like I said, not a pure democracy.
Mm-hmm.
So that means that you you're accountable for the things that you ran on.
Mm-hmm.
So if you said I'm a conservative, but then you do non-conservative things,
Right.
they can hold you accountable.
Mm-hmm.
But the real accountability is, you know, are you operating with the integrity of what you ran on?
Mm-hmm.
And if you lose elections because you acted in the way that you told people you were going to act, you should be able to live with that.
Yeah.
And the people change, and
Mm-hmm.
that's how people get unelected over time.
Yep.
But yeah, like you've got a few bosses and
Yep.
you're balancing all of that. But there's a few that are, we don't violate the Constitution,
Mm-hmm.
and it's certainly not knowingly.
Right.
Like we brought there's stuff that happens that you're like, okay, like
Oh, I'm sure.
that kind of thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
you know,
So I guess the other question related to that, before I ask my second question, is a lot of folks kind of get to the, well, if, yeah, it's the people, which is the right answer. But then it's, and they'll just not elect me next time. That's 4 years away.
yeah.
So what do you do in the meantime?
I mean, and you don't know if the people are going to unelect you.
Right.
And so in the meantime, you do your best and you have those principles that you ran on. Like you have to filter things through the principles and
Mm-hmm.
processes that you've set up to protect yourself, to protect the people, to protect, the state,
Uh-huh.
and so you're always doing that and you're hoping that the people find that that's acceptable,
Right.
but you
Mm-hmm.
don't know for another 4 years.
Right. So the other question is, you're running as a Republican.
Yeah.
So how does the party hold you accountable, or how do you hold yourself accountable to the party?
Yeah. I mean, I think number one, if you're running as a Republican, you need to understand what the platform of the party is.
Mm-hmm.
You're not necessarily, I don't view the party in and of itself as an organization, or even like voting for Republicans and that kind of thing,
Right.
in as high a regard as I do the principles on which the party is created and is agreed upon.
Mm-hmm.
So that platform is more important to me than party affiliation or anything like that.
Okay.
I'm a Republican because it most closely aligns with the principles that I believe in.
Right.
There are, things that I've seen Republicans and the Republican Party do that I'm like, I don't know that I'm there with you on that.
Yep.
And I think everyone should feel that way. Like there's no organization that perfectly aligns with somebody's everything.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, it's something that you should be accountable to the principles that you ran on. And if you ran in a party,
Mm-hmm.
those are the platform planks on
Right.
which the party is based.
Yep.
And that's, I always, I have this page that I put up that, shows the UCRP platform and my commitments and how I kept them. And it's because I do believe in accountability and measurement. And
Mm-hmm.
you should be able to look at the principle of the party and what I did in relation to that to see whether I've kept that commitment or not.
Right.
Whether you like that or not, or agree with that or not, I ran as a Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means fiscal responsibility. It means family values, a fear of God, and,
Yeah.
respect for all of those natural rights. Like, those are all things that we have to have if that's how you're going to run.
Yep. All right. Last thing. I'm assuming you have some way you want people to contact you: website, email,
Yeah.
phone number, or something else.
Okay. So I'll give all three. Website is votebrammer.com. Email is votebrammer@gmail.com. And the cell phone, and it is textable, is 801-709-1790.
All right. Well,
Okay.
thanks, Brady.
Hey, thank you. Really appreciate it, Chuck.
Yeah.